Begin the current Daf, Beitzah Daf Lamed Dal. Begin on the bottom of Daf Lamed Gimel and Beis, 3 lines up in the bottom of the Amud, where we continue the halacha from our previous Mishnah regarding different activities that are permitted, forbidden on Yom Tov, relating to Tikkun Mana, regarding Misaken Kli, which is under the rubric of Makar Patush. She is corresponds because of Cheskot, Tanitim, Dafachem. Krishna was joining us for today's Daf. Some things we're going to discuss in today's Daf are, as we mentioned, more discussion about various activities which are forbidden on Yom Tov and the permissible ways to perform them on Yom Tov. The issue of separating Trumas and Meisers on Shabbos and Yom Tov. The concept of Hukva L'Meiser, as well as Nigma Malachtan, those are two different variables that are critical relating to produce and separating Trumas and Meisers. The obligation only happens when you have Hukva L'Meiser and Gmar Malachtan, which is when you finish the production. The key terms of concept we can discuss in today's Daf are treifa, which is even if you shecht an animal properly, but if it has one of the mortal defects, then it's going to be considered as non-kosher. Kvila meiser, what we just mentioned before, we're going to hook for the meiser, nigma malachtan, is even if you already finished the production of the produce, but it's still not going to be obligated in trumas and meisers until you do an act, like bringing it into the house or making a meal out of it. Only then will it become mechuyev in trumas and meisers, and then become forbidden in consumption, as the next concept of tevel, which is untied produce, which is before you take off trumas and meisers. So too, even when a lady gets meiserishin before he takes off his trumas meisers, consider untied produce, and there's a punishment of karas for eating that. Tevel muchen hu etzel Shabbos is the concept that even though tevel is forbidden to be eaten, so one would say it's considered muktzah on Shabbos because of it's a muktzah machmas isser because of the prohibition related to it. We say no, it's considered prepared by Shabbos because of a tiknai, someone violates and he does fix it, it's going to be misukon, and therefore it's not considered muktzah relating to Shabbos. To begin the current Daf Lamed Gimel Beis, the 3 lines up at the bottom of the Amud. We said in the Mishnah the imal labnes or often that you cannot whiten, which is meaning by heating up the tiles. So says the Gemara Maika of it. What is the person doing? This is one by new tiles, and the reason is as a continued type of Lamadal Menalef Labodkan, that you have to go ahead and check it out, you have to inspect it. If it could accept, they would use these tiles in heating things up, and you have to check to see if it could accept its whitening, getting heated up. So the reason why in Yom Tov you can't do this is because maybe it's going to burst because it's new, and it's going to turn out that you went through the effort unnecessarily because you didn't do it, you didn't use something on Yom Tov. So because of that, that's why you can't heat up the white tiles, because you're going to be checking them out, and it might not handle that heat. Some say they should tzarich l'chasman. No, the reason why is because before you use them, you have to harden them. The first time you heat them up, they become hardened and strong. So therefore, although that is needed for tzarich Yom Tov, because these tiles, they would roast on them, but since in this first heating, because it's brand new, it would make it into a kli, so therefore that's going to rest us again, and it's going to be 2 different interpretations. The Gemara is going to actually relate back to these 2 different interpretations. Either it's because you have to be baitik it, it's brand new, you don't know if it's going to make it, it might not be strong enough. Sometimes you buy a new product, it's not strong, and therefore that concern says, okay, it's going to be a tircha that's shalei l'tzarech, or no, because you're going to be making it into a kli right now, l'chasman, therefore you can't make a kli, like we're saying in the halachas of our Mishnah, tikkun mana. Now, relating back to this halach of our Mishnah, it's not hostile. We're going to read in the Mishnah Mesech, the school in Perikei L'Treifus. Mishnah says as follows: Durasa, if a person stepped on the bird, or he threw it and he banged it b'kaisel on a wall, or similarly, an animal stepped on it. Now, be that as it may, it got a trauma, and it's shaking, and it can't stand. But the animal survived for a period of 24 hours, for a full day. And then it was slaughtered. So the halacha says the Mishnah is ksher, it's going to be kosher. Now, however, this gives an important qualification. He says that when you see that it survived 24 hours, it still requires a bedika, an internal investigation after it's slaughtered. Why? Because maybe most of its ribs broke, or maybe the spine broke, the spinal column, or one of the other kinds of trephus. Like Rashi explains, there's really two concerns that we have over here. So, because Rashi's bothered, he says, and if you're going to do an internal investigation, what do you have to say, like the Mishnah said, that you waited 24 hours? Anyone's going to be doing an internal investigation. The reason is because if you didn't wait, even though you checked inside and you didn't find any simoni tarfus, it's still going to be considered as a trefa. Because that's one of the 18 trefas, which is called risuk evar. When you have that the limbs are dislodged, even if you don't see any recognizable sign, that is the sign that if it lasts for 24 hours, then you know it didn't have risuk evar, because that's what the Rabbana had, a tradition from Halacha Mishim Sinai. If it had this internally dislodged limbs, it wouldn't survive for 24 hours. Now, the problem is, so why do you have to do the investigation? Just wait 24 hours. No, because other mortal defects, it could survive for 12 months. So therefore, there's these two concerns of risuk evam or trephus. So regarding the dislodged internal organs, it can't survive 24 hours by waiting 24 hours, so that eliminates that concern. But then you also have to do an internal investigation for a critical organ, internal organ could be damaged. That can't be for 12 months. So that when you check that internal investigation, that takes care of that. Okay, that was the Mishnah. Now, related to that Mishnah, says the Gemara, such a case where the animal had this trauma, can you slaughter such an animal on Yom Tov? In other words, are we concerned that since, you waited 24 hours, but you have to do an inspection, are we concerned that there might have been something that happened? So as the Gemara explains, are we going to presume that there is some type of a flaw inside the animal, and therefore we're concerned that you might do an Isra Malacha B'Yom Tov? Because what happens is you might find that it's a trefa. If it's a trefa, comes out you did a malacha of shchita unnecessarily. I lie, or maybe not. Like Rashi explains what it means. Someone that once asked this before regarding all other animals. Yeah, all other animals, although we are stringent on ourselves and we do an internal inspection, but we rely on Raiv, on majority. Most animals are not treifas. But over here, where it had a trauma, had some type of a situation that would require more concern, are you allowed to shech such an animal? Are we be machzik the reis or not? So Amalei said to him, Tanina, this Allah in the Mishnah we just quoted before. We said in the Mishnah, Aim Allah nesed often let's list, and you cannot heat up the tiles which they would use to roast on it. Now, Bavinba, which was a question we just asked opening up the daf, we had asked, my covet, what are you doing? What's wrong? Why can't you heat up something? You're allowed to heat up stuff to cook on Yom Tov. And this is by new tiles. What's the problem with new tiles? They should start with because you have to check: is it strong enough? Is the product going to last? Is it going to take heat? And we're concerned that maybe it's going to burst. Oh, so obviously we are machzik reis, so we do presume that there's a problem over here because the stringent Yom Tov not to heat it up because it might have been shaloi l'tzarech. So it's exactly over here when this animal we're not sure, it might have had a treifa, we're machzik reis and we don't let you do it on Yom Tov. So Malay says no, anan us. The reason why we're asking the question is there was two interpretations that the Gemara gave. He says that we don't go like that. We go like the other interpretation, which was not because of concern that the tiles might burst, but because definitively you're making a vessel the first time you heat it up. That was the other shot that we gave in the Gemara. That's making a kli, that's tikkun mana. That's the problem. And therefore there's no raya from the halacha of our Mishnah regarding if there's a concern to presume there's such a concern because we don't give that interpretation. And again, therefore we're asking the question, and based on that interpretation, there's no resolution. Now, related to this idea that of this halacha of our Mishnah of heating up the tiles, so Tanya Litna Brisa, there's many different people that are involved in this situation, which is Echad maybe or one guy brings the fire. Echad maybe says one guy brings the wood. And one guy puts the empty pot on the fire. Maybe one guy brings the water. And one guy puts the spices inside. And one guy mixes the pot with a spoon. And they're all going to be liable for having done the malacha on Shabbos. Why? Because the guy who brings the fire, so he's being mavir bigachelis. He's igniting the coal by bringing it. which as he's bringing it, it gets heated up from the movement. So the one who brings the wood to the fire, he's also igniting that's havara, maver, he's igniting the wood in the flame. The guy who puts the pot on, the Gemara is going to shortly explain what is he doing wrong. The guys who put in the water and the spices and mixes it, they're doing bishul, they're cooking, which is also a malacha. So they're all going to be chayev for doing malacha on Shabbos. Problem is, we're talking about another verse that says achron chayev, only the last guy is going to be chayev, but they're all going to be exempt. So it's more like not difficult. When did we say that they're all going to be chayev? Is the shiur mi'ikar. The first one to do was the guy who brought the fire. So they're all doing something wrong, as we explained. Once the fire is there, the guy who puts the wood is igniting. The guy who brings the water and the spices and the mixing, they're all doing bishul because the fire is already there. This that we said only the last guy's chayav is the shiur l'b'seif. The guy who does the flame is the last guy to come. So only he did something wrong. The rest didn't do anything wrong. The guy put in the water, put in the spices. The guy mixed. There's nothing that was being done over there. And the wood also, the guy who did the flame, that was the last thing. He's the only one that's going to be chayav. But now the Gemara says, okay, we understand that all of them did something. We could understand how it could be a malacha. The guy who went and mixed, a guy who just put the empty pot on the stove, what is it did he do? He says, as we mentioned this idea regarding our tiles before, he was talking about a new pot where you put it on the fire empty to do chasima, the chaysim, to go ahead and with a samach, to strengthen it, to solidify it. It's the same gezerah that we said in the Mishnah, that the reason why you're not allowed to heat up the tiles is because of that you're strengthening it, you're making it into a kli, which is the theme of these Mishnayos of tikkun mana. You're making it into a new pot when you heat it up. That's why the guy who put on the pot did something wrong. The others are doing either mavir or bishul. He's doing tikkun mana, he's doing makav about this by putting on the new pot. That was what the guy who was shayfes as a gedera, what he did wrong. Now, continue on this theme regarding new stoves and new pots and new entities. Says the Gemara, Tarnaban. Learn the Beitzah Tanu b'kirayim chadashim. New ovens and stoves, and for sure old ones. Harehin kekol hakelim hanitolen. They're like old vessels that can be moved on Shabbos, b'chatzir in the courtyard. Why could they be moved? Why could an oven be moved? You're not cooking on Shabbos. Because as Rashi says, you're able to put something inside of it. Many people, when guests come along, they put all the dirty pots or whatever this and that inside the oven. Right? It can be utilized for different things. So therefore, it's not considered muktzah. Now, avol bat in sachan oisen shemen. You can't smear them with oil to smooth them and to shine them. And in tashan oisen b'matlas. You can't go ahead and smear them with a cloth. And the aim, when after it's heated up, you cannot be mafigan oisan. You cannot cool them down with cold water. Kidei lechasman. This is the theme that we were talking about before, because when you put on the cold water, it actually hardens it. And again, all these, like Rashi explains, all these reasons of what the past few things we just said, the problem is because of tikkun mana, because essentially you're making the vessel when you're doing these things. Now, but let's say you're cooling it off because of baking, because it was heated up very much, and you're concerned that if you're going to put in the bread right now, it's going to get burnt. Then again, then on Yom Tov that would be permitted, because that would be considered as a purpose of oichel nefesh and not of tikkun mana. Continue on this theme of these halachas. Mulgan, a person could.
This is not according to our missions.
What do you mean?
They said you're not allowed to use rafin and rafin is rafin.
Right. One of the interpretations we had in the Mishnah of Eima Labnas at often was that you can't heat up the tiles because of Menish Tzorch Lachasman, because it's new.
But you do the same thing with the Kedera.
We said by the Kedera you can't, with this, which Kedera? The oven?
Yeah.
So he said that the oven, you cannot be mafigit b'tzayin and Kedei Lachasman, but if it's to baking, then it would be permitted. Meaning you can't, Taisus does discuss, there's different types of cases that depending on how vadai it's going to be chaysim or not going to be chaysim. But the theme seems to be that everyone agrees that you cannot do something that would be lachasim, something meaning to solidify and strengthen it, because that would be makabapatish, that would be making it. And therefore, yeah, like the Mishnah said, the Beitzah just quoted said that the oven would not be able to be cooled off with cold water. That strengthens it. Again, if it's to baking, so then that's not your intention. So then it would be permitted to be done.
He says that before we're talking about a case of eventual function of roasting food. Here we're talking about a case where he's actually going to do it right away. So therefore, it's considered an act of direct food preparation.
So therefore, it's different that that it's considered as oichel nefesh. Yeah, good point. Now this next Beitzah continues on this theme of different permitted and forbidden activities on Yom Tov. So turn about within the Beitzah mulgin. What you could do is that you can put hot water on es haroish, the sriglaim, the head of the animal, the feet of the animal, or you could singe them in fire. Aval, but what you can't do is ein toifun oisam becharsis. You can't smear them with type of lime, v'loy ba'adama, not with earth, v'loy b'sid, also type of lime. And the reason why you would do this is because you want to remove the hair. So although we said you're allowed to do maliga, which is very similar when they pour hot water and gets rid of the hair, but you can't do it with lime because that's the way, like Rashi says, the abdomen. That's the way the tanners do it. Again, that's type of a malacha type of activity, like in the chayil. And in goizen oisem b'misparai, you can't cut it off with scissors because again, that looks like you need the hair, which is not a permitted Yom Tov need. And the in goizen is a yerk. You can't go ahead and cut off the vegetables that are already detached, but on the tops of the leaves they have these the old not worn out. What's the word? It's like moldy. What? Wilted type of leaves. So you can't cut that with betas pirushalai. Can't cut it with the special scissors that are used, which are the same scissors that you use it to detach it from the ground. Because whoever sees you cutting with those scissors thinks, this guy went and he cut it from the ground today, because those are the scissors that you use to cut from the ground, so you can't use those scissors when you cut off those wilted leaves. Now, these are types of vegetables which it's very cumbersome. There's a lot of tircha in fixing them. Still, you're allowed to fix these vegetables. And so too, related about tircha, masikin ba'ifin b'purne, you're allowed to go ahead and heat up and bake in a purne, which is a very large oven, and the opening is on the side, which again, the idea is we're not concerned for tircha if a guy has a lot of food where it's not enough in a regular tanner. He's allowed to use a large oven called a purne. And so to mechamen chamen b'tichi, he's also allowed to go ahead and heat up hot water in the tichi, which is also a very large water urn, because if you need it, we're not concerned for that tircha. Now, but you cannot go ahead and bake in a new purni, which is a new large oven, because since it's new, it might cave in, comes out you did the tircha shalai l'tzarech unnecessarily, and therefore you wouldn't be able to bake in this new purni. Continue on these themes, turn about in the Beitzah. You're not allowed to blow, you're not allowed to fan the flames of a fire using bellows, because that looks like the way a professional tool appears as a ma'isa uman, and therefore you can't blow it with the bellows. But you could blow it with a tube. So too, you can't fix a spit, which Rashi says either that's obviously not like Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that you could be mesaker machshir echel nefesh, you could fix the tools, obviously not like Rabbi Yehuda, or it's talking about that it actually got ruined from before Yom Tov, which everyone agrees. If Echsher Echel Nefesh could have been fixed from before Yom Tov, you cannot do that on Yom Tov, so you can't fix the spit. And even Be'emechad Nois, you can't even just sharpen it. More halachas on this. You cannot peel or read, where they would put the peel beneath the salted fish on the grill. You cannot peel that, literally by maliach, to roast the salted fish on it, because again, you're making a kli. Because anything that you're making to utilize is essentially taking kli. Apple, but a different type of cracking. You could crack a nut with a cloth, and we're not concerned that maybe the cloth is going to tear. Rashi says even if it's going to tear, we're not concerned because that's not kriyeya manas litfer. It's not even tearing with the intention of stitching. Kibbutz finds difficult. Still, it's also a drabanan. Why didn't write simply? It's like a shimon that's ein miskaven and it's mutter and it's not psikration. But be that as it may, even if it's going to tear, it's not going to be a concern that therefore you could crack it with a cloth. You know, look at the next Mishnah, which continues on the theme of muktzah. Rabbi Eliezer, moreover, says, which Rashi discussed what's the ba'id, because he had taught in a previous Mishnah one leniency regarding the laws of muktzah, which was that of the splinters, the twigs, if you could use it to clean out your teeth and use it as a toothpick. And now he's saying another halacha related to muktzah, so therefore he says va'id. What's va'id? Va'id, remember, as he says, a person could stand on something that's in the muktzah, meaning it needs to be prepared. Muktzah means it's not prepared, it's set aside. Mukha means it is prepared. So a person can stand on something that's not prepared, that needs to be prepared, but preparing would be effective, which, as Rashi points out, we had a case in the Chavam Mabeis where it's fit, it's not fit, and it would depend on the person's personal preferences if he's considering it as ready or not. So, such a thing a person could stand over there, as we continue to Mabeis, Erev Shabbos L'Shvius. On Friday afternoon, in a Shemitah year, now why are we talking about a Shemitah year? So Rashi tells us because there's no halachas of Meiser in a Shemitah year. So essentially the only thing that's holding it back from being used on Shabbos is Hazman, is just designating, say I want to use this tomorrow. But Rashi says the same thing would apply in a case of other years in the Shemitah cycle, and that it was already had Meiser taken from it. It's just the reason why the Mishnah is saying this way is because normative is that when you have in the muktzah, which is like the place where you put the drawing of the figs, and that's where it's set aside, where no one walks there usually, that's what stam muktzah is. It's generally not meiser taken from it, because it's not, didn't have a gemar malacha yet, because you didn't finish the production yet, you're still drying it out. And generally you don't take off the meises before the gemar malacha. So it really wouldn't be the norm to have standing there by the muktzah with mice already taken. And we specifically want to be talking about that there's no problems about mice. The only problem is that it's not muchan yet. You didn't do hazman. So therefore we picked on a Shemitah year, but really it doesn't have to be. It's just that you don't want to have that there's any problem about mice. And ba'ima, he could say, from here, he doesn't specify where, but it says from here, I want to take tomorrow some fruits to eat on Shabbos, and that's enough because the Rashi tells us he holds yesh breira, where retroactively it's verified those were the ones that I prepared. The Chachamim, they disagree. They say no, actually Yershim, till he actually marks off with a sign. The Yomim, he says mikan bad kan, from here until here, because they hold of ein breira, that it's not sufficient to just say from here. You have to give a definitive sign about what it is where you're going to be taken from, and then it's we consider as muchan, as prepared for tomorrow. Now, the Gemara introduces halacha, which for produce to become obligated in Trumas and Maisus, there's two conditions that have to be met. There's nigmar malachtai, that the work, the production has to be finished, and there's roya pnei habayis, that it has to have already come into the home. Before that's been done, so minat Torah, it could even be eaten achilas kavai, you could either eat a regular meal out of it, because not yem mechuyev in Trumas and Maisus, but Rabbanan could only be eaten achilas sarai. Now, Gemara is going to discuss as it relates to the halacha of Mishnah, and as it relates to the halacha specifically, like we're talking about regarding Shabbos. So first thing Gemara introduces, it's non-hasim. It's going to come back to the halacha of Mishnah. Learn the Mishnah said this meisers to noikis shetamnu te'enim. If you had children that they buried figs in the field or in the garden because they wanted to keep it there, they were hiding it away because they wanted to eat from it on Shabbos, and they did this Erev Shabbos on Friday afternoon. The kids went and they hid it in the garden on Friday. Now, they forgot, they didn't take off meiser from the figs from before Shabbos. So halacha is, l'matzah Shabbos, when you end up finding these figs on matzah Shabbos, lo yochlu, you cannot eat from them. Only if you first take off meiser. Now, Rashi addresses and explains what the Mishnah's Chiddush is coming to tell us. Even though the halacha is that tevel, untyped produce, does not become obligated meiser to make it forbidden to eat a snack until it comes into the house, or at least comes into the courtyard, like the Gemara says about Metzidat Pei Chesem and Aleph. So what's going on over here? Here it never came into the house, never came into the Chatzir. So why would it be Mechuyev and Maestras on Matzah Shabbos? So the reason is because the eating on Shabbos is so chashuv that its snacking is like achilas keva. So therefore, if it was hidden away for eating on Shabbos, that makes it hukava. The same thing when you bring it into the house is what Shabbos automatically does. Now, Rashi says, why we speak about specifically tinoikis, children who hid away the figs. So that's another chiddush. It's coming to tell us that although a machshava of a child is not considered halachically significant, but when it's a machshava ademaisa hamoichiach, if, as the Gemara tells us in Chulun Daf Yomi and Aleph, if their thought process is being illustrated through an action, then we say their machshava is significant. So them thinking they want to use it for Shabbos wouldn't be enough. But since they did an action, and when they hid it away for Shabbos treat, we're going to have Shabbos party figs, and they hid it away, that's a machshava ademaisa mechiach, that would give it a machshava of saying it's designated for Shabbos, and hence it would have the halacha of hukva l'maiser, just like when it comes into the house, so too that it was set aside for Shabbos, that makes it into a kviyas. Now, moreover, you also have the other variable, that figs are things that are nigma malachta. As we said, there's two conditions. There's roi pnei habayis, which Shabbos is that equivalent, and you have nigma malachta. Figs are gemar malachta unless you thought that you want to use it to dry them up or to make them into gregris. But until then, the moment that they're finished, they're already gemar malachta. They don't have to have like wheat that you have to thresh it and do a whole procedure to get to the kernel. It's already ready. Now, that's what the Mishnah in Maestras is coming to tell us. Something that's already nigma malachta, which is what the figs are, it becomes hukva l'maisa even without seeing the home. As long as Shabbos passed it by, that it was prepared for Shabbos. Now, the thing is, that was only told to us regarding something that was nigma malachta. But something that was loy nigma malachta, didn't finish its production yet, that was not told to us in the Mishnah Masechtas Maestras. If it would be hukva l'maiser, it would become established and obligated meiser by coming through Shabbos or not. We only saw a case of figs, which figs is already nigma malachta. Now, it's not nam. This takes us to the second step. We also learned the Mishnah Masechtas Maestras. Hamaver, if someone is spreading out to einim figs bechatzera in his courtyard, liktzais, to dry them up, to make out of them ketziyos, which are they dry out the figs, and after they dry them out, then they would press them together in a round cake. We always call igule devela, the round cakes of the figs. They would dry it up, and then they would make it into this round pressed cake. But if someone spreads out the figs in this courtyard to dry them up, so his family members could go ahead and snack from these figs, and they're exempt from taking meiser. Why? Because being in the courtyard does not obligate by just being in the courtyard, which although that's one of the two variables, riyas pnei habayis coming into the house or at least being into the courtyard, it's only if you have the other variable like we said, if it also was nigma malachta. But here, since it's not nigma malachta, didn't I just say a second ago figs are automatically a nigma malachta? Yeah, but that's only if you're not drying them out. If you're drying them out, it's not finished yet until you actually dry them out. So if you put them in the courtyard to dry them out, and they're not dried out yet, so the kids could snack from it, it's not yet considered hukva l'maisa. But that's what the Gemara's question now is, and that's going to relate back to the halacha of the Mishnah, is boimenei rovim Rav Nachman. But Rav asked Rav Nachman, Shabbos, regarding Shabbos, is it like the halacha of the courtyard, or is it actually more severe than the courtyard? And Mausha Tikva Muktzah. What's halacha? Could it go ahead and establish Muktzah, which is something that is not nigma malachta? It was in that set aside area behind the house, which people would use to dry things up. Would it make it obligated lemaiser bedavar shalei nigma malachta, but something that they do not finish the work? Which Rashi says it's really superfluous because, as Rashi says, really what Muktzah was coming to illustrate is really something that's not finished production yet, like nigma malachta, and It was just written into the text, but really it's just explaining what muktzah is. What's the question? Why would we say that it would become huk for the meiser just by passing through Shabbos if it was designated for Shabbos? Because Miriam do we say, given this, since the famous passage says in Yishai, the Shabbos Einig, that you're going to call out for Shabbos as a delight, where the eating of Shabbos is called an Einig, so kava, so goes and establishes that there's no more snacking anymore. Every eating on Shabbos is considered a kavah. And therefore, even something that the production wasn't finished yet, doesn't make a difference. Shabbos automatically goes and makes it into a chashivus, and therefore becomes huk v'lemaiser, even if it's lo nigmar malachte. By Dilma, no, maybe no. The davar shnigmar malachte covered just like by chatzir. Just like by chatzir, it only makes a kavua if it already finished the production. But by davar shnigmar malachte, like cover, but even Shabbos would be the same limitation if it did not have gemar malach yet, where it was in the muktzah, it was still drying out, it's not finished yet production, then Shabbos would not make it that it becomes automatically obligated in Trumas and Maisus. So Malay Rav Nachman responded, he says, Shabbos krivas. Shabbos establishes that it was designated for Shabbos. Yes, it can be forbidden, even Matzah Shabbos, like we brought that mission in Mesechtas Maisus with the children. And even if it wasn't designated for Shabbos, on Shabbos itself it's forbidden for everything, because the eating on Shabbos is always considered kviyas. Now, if it wasn't designated for Shabbos, Matzah Shabbos it would be permitted, like the Gemara is going to tell us later on. But Al Kapan Shabbos is kviyas, bein b'davar sh'nig malachna, whether it's something that the production is finished, bein b'davar sh'nig malachna, even if something the production was not finished, Shabbos is more chamer than chatzir, more chamer than re'is pnei habayis. It makes it obligated just by being designated for Shabbos. And that Amalei says to him, why? So why don't you say that Shabbos is similar to the halacha of a courtyard? Just like the courtyard only established something that already finished production. Of Shabbos, so the Shabbos shouldn't establish unless it's something that's already finished production. Amalei said to him, yeah, limud aruch b'yadeinu. Says no, this is a prepared, well-known teaching that we have in our hands. Shabbos kavas, that Shabbos establishes whether it's something that you finished the production, whether you didn't finish production, that's still drying it out. Does it make a difference? If you had planned on eating it for Shabbos, then it's already considered huk v'lemaiser. And when Matzah Shabbos comes around, although the children hid it and they didn't use it over Shabbos, you would have to go ahead and separate Trumas and Maisers. That on Mazutra b'Rei Rav Nachman. So this was Rav Nachman. So Mazutra, the son of Rav Nachman, wants to support his father's teaching from our Mishnah. So he says, Tati, this we also learned this in our Mishnah. No, what we learned in our Mishnah, and this is where it relates back. We said in the Mishnah, Leza also said, a person could stand on the muktzah. Again, muktzah doesn't mean like a battery-operated thing. When we use in muktzah in the Gemara, we mean that, let's say, in the backyard, on the roof, where they would set aside, no one goes there because it's the middle of, it's not finished Gemar Malacha yet. No, you don't frequent there because that's where you put the drying fruits over there. So it's not Nigma Malachta yet, those progress. That's why we said it's muktzah. You have to have and be mazamin and prepare it because we assume it's muktzah because it's still drying. So Rebbe Lezer says a person can stand there on the muktzah, which are the produce that's not yet finished. Erev Shabbos on Friday afternoon, b'shvius in the Shemitah year, etc. Which again, either he says from here I'm going to eat tomorrow, or the Chacham said he has to say mikan but kan. But be that as an A, says Mazutra like this. Time of the Shvi is the reason is because it's a Shemitah year. What's significant about being a Shemitah year? The Lav Ba'asturihu, where there's no obligation of Maisis in the Shemitah year, which here Rashi tells us where we know that from actually. It's a Mechilta that learns that from a pasuk in Shemais Chav Gimel. It says Va'achlu ev yoini amecha, the paupers, the destitute ones of your people will eat the yitrim, and they'll take off trumas, teichel chayes asada, and the yisrael, the leftover, will be eaten by the wild animals. And this is in the Shemitah year, where everyone could eat from your stuff, which we compare just like a wild animal eats without taking meiser, so to a person in the Shemitah year could also eat without taking off meiser. Okay, so in the Shemitah year, there's no concern about meiser. The only concern would be, okay, it's still, out of sight, out of mind, because it's in the muktzah, in the set aside, backyard area. So okay, you have to be preparing it before Shabbos. That's considered mucha. But Habashar Shnei sounds like other years of the Shemitah cycle, the first through sixth year. Sounds like Hachanami de Aser, that it would be forbidden to eat it the next day. Why? Because of Meiser. it sounds like only Shemitah, there's no problem about Meiser, so just designated would be good. But other years, no, it wouldn't be enough to say from here to here, because you didn't take off Meiser, because you didn't finish production yet. But wait a second, says Mazucha, my timer. Why by the other Shemitah years would you not be able to use that tomorrow on Shabbos? But all the other years of a Shemitah cycle, it does not become Kavua Hukvila Meiser without having Re'is Pnei Abayis, without coming into the house first. And even in the house does not become Hukvila Meiser, only when it comes through the gates, as the Gemara says in Beitzah Daf Peichas Menal. But here, where it's coming into the house, because you want to use it on Shabbos, it's not Hukva, because you didn't have Gemar Malachti yet. Again, it's in the Muktzah, it's not finished drawing yet. And we said before that a Chatzar is not Kavas La Meiser, only when you have Gemar Malachti. And house and courtyard is the same thing, like the Gemara says over there in Bava Metzia. So then the question is, why is our Mishnah telling us this halacha specifically in the Shemitah year? To tell us, but other years would be Aser, because of Meiser. Meiser? What's the problem? What Meiser? Why would there be a Chiv of Meiser? Which Chiv of Meiser? Because you're going to take it into your house, but it's not Nigma Malachta yet. You told me it's only when you Nigma Malachta, then it becomes a B'chui when you come in and you bring it into your house. Oh, Lav Mishum de Shabbos Kavla. Isn't it because even though it's not Nigma Malachta, and bringing it to your Chatz and your Beis would not make him a Chiv of Meiser, but Shabbos is, says Mazucha to his father of Nachman, aha! You see in our Mishnah, Shabbos is Mohammed and Chatzar. Even Loi Nigma Malachtai would make him a Chayva Meiser. And therefore this halacha of a Mishnah would only work in the Shemitah year, that you took care of the problems about Muktzah / Muchan. But regarding Meiser, you'd be in a bind, because you didn't take off Meisers from it, and it would become a Chayiv. Why? It's not Nigma Malachtai, but Shabbos is Kevas, even Loi Nigma Malachtai. So the Gemara rejects the Rai and says, Loi, no. Shani Hassam, there it's different in the halacha of a Mishnah. Shabbos wouldn't be Kevas maybe, if it's Loi Nigma Malachtai. But in our Mishnah, Kiman de Amar, because actually one thing is fixing but making the other problem. We said the guy has to say, Mikanani Eichel Amach. He says, from here I'm going to eat tomorrow. Now, why do you have to do that? Because the laws of Shabbos Muktzah, because the else is not considered prepared. The problem is, you're being machshavit with your dibur, where you're calling it achila. That now makes a problem for the laws of Meiser with Kavala and Laveh. So you just made it a kriyas now with your words. So it's not Shabbos, it's your words that are actually creating the problem. So then the Gemara says, wait a second. If the reasoning is because of his words, not because of Shabbos, so in my area, why are you telling me this halacha specifically on Shabbos, meaning you're doing this Erev Shabbos, Fel B'chol Nami? There should be a weekday activity. This should be said in Seidas Run. Here, we're talking about the halachas of Yom Tov and Mesechtas Be'ah, Yom Tov / Shabbos. So the machlekes that we should be saying, we should be talking about preparing birds, like we had machlekes b'sham Basil on Daf Yomi and Al regarding the laws of prayer. But what does this have to do with anything? This would be a problem on any day of the week, because you have a problem about Meiser. Why are you talking about specifically on Shabbos? Says the Gemara, you're right. Truth is, our Mishnah could have been speaking not taking place on Shabbos. But Hokamash Malam, the reason why we said it regarding Shabbos is because we wanted to tell you a different halacha, Agav Orche, which we had to disagree regarding Shabbos, which was regarding Muktzah, regarding preparing. So we then parenthetically said together with it another halacha that yes, other years of a Shemitah cycle would not be forbidden when you prepared it. The only problem would be because of Meiser. But actually, for Shabbos, it would not have a problem of being prepared, meaning Muktzah / Muchan for the laws of Shabbos Yom Tov. Because we're telling you that Tevel Muchanhu Eitzel Shabbos. We're telling you that Tevel, untyped produce, is considered prepared for the laws of Shabbos. Well, how is it prepared? Shem Avar V'Tikne Mesukim, because if you violate the rabbinic law of fixing Trumas and Meiser, separating them, it actually is considered fixed. And then actually you would be allowed to eat the produce. And we don't say that it's not effective to prepare it Erev Shabbos if it wasn't yet fixed, because you would have thought to say, wait, this is considered tevel, it's muktzah machmas isser, because it's set aside because there's a prohibition of fixing it. And I would have thought to say that therefore a person's masif das, and it's not mucha. That's the chiddush of our Mishnah, parenthetically, is that saying that no, separating trumas and meisers, biblically you're allowed to do that on Shabbos. That's not biblically allowed, that's only a rabbinic prohibition of it looks like a tikkun mana, but it's not really fixing something. So therefore that would not make a muktzah machmas isser. And that's what we learn from the Mishnah. How so? So Rashi tells us. The words in the Mishnah were, Oymed Adam ala muktzah, like a tchila b'shviyas. We said a person could be standing on the unfinished produce, Erev Shabbos in the Shemitah year. And we said that, there's no problem about separating meisers because it's Shemitah year. So there's no problem with meisers. The only problem would be the halachas of muktzah for Shabbos. So that you're taken care of by designating Erev Shabbos. Now, you cannot be medayik from there and say, so wait a second. That means there would be an Isser on all the other years of the Shemitah because the words are, the inference of the Mishnah is that the other years of the Shemitah cycle, you're not allowed to stand there and say this. Why? Because if you do, you're establishing it with your words, and therefore becomes mechuyev b'meiser because of your words, like we said. And tomorrow you'd be eating it in an untyped state. Because if you think that the Tana is coming to tell us, like was being mentioned before, that the Isser of Muktzah is not removed from it, then what should have been said was, someone who stands on the Muktzah on Erev Shabbos in the Shemitah year, and he says, from here I'm going to eat tomorrow, so that Harizah min hamuchen. If it would have said those words, that's from Muchen, then the dik would have been, but the other years of the Shemitah cycle is not Muchen, because of the fact that it's Tevel. But it doesn't say that. Now, the words that it does say, we don't learn out that it's going to be forbidden because of Muktzah. We learn out because of the problems about Meiser. And that's why we picked to talk about Shabbos. Truth is, it has nothing to do with Shabbos. Really, it's Diburoi. It's his words that's Machshavet, that's Kaveh, and therefore the Gemara rejected the Raya that Mar Zutra wanted to bring for his father of Nachman. You don't see Shabbos creating a case for Meiser, even something that's Lo Nigma Malachtoi. Yes, it's Lo Nigma Malachtoi, but it's because he says, Mikan ani echel amachar, that's why it goes ahead and makes it Mechuyev and Meiser, even though it was Lo Nigma Malachtoi, because essentially he is being going with Malachtoi by his words, he's Machshavet, and we only said Shabbos parenthetically because of a halacha that we wanted to tell you that would relate to the laws of Muktzah, but again, it's not really anything as a raya for Shabbos per se. Thank you to any time for hosting this.